Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at the best healers in Season 3 so far. We're going to be using real player information. We're going to be using data to determine how healers are shaping up both in raids and Mythic Plus content. We're going to be looking at race to world first and all of those things. Let's go and get started with raiding first. What you see on the screen right now is real player information doing the new raid on Mythic content with 75 percentile. So if you're playing your class to a relatively decent extent, you might expect to see certain HPS numbers right here. Now, this is only tracking HPS, and this is not the defining factor of which class is the best or which class is the worst, because HPS is not the defining factor of what makes a healer good, especially when it comes to Mythic raiding, when you're trying to balance your whole raid comp and trying to pick up a lot of raid buffs. If you're doing Mythic content, I'm assuming that a lot of these healers might have some sort of tier set. I don't think every single healer who's doing Mythic raiding content right now has the 4 set, so the HPS numbers are definitely going to significantly change in a week or two, when you could safely assume that most healers out there are going to have a 4 set. And as you can see, Mistweaver Monk is actually pumping pure HPS. We'll have to see how that's going to change in a week or two when people get more gear and things like that, but I want to showcase some of the most popular builds that are being used on the first Mythic boss skill. Again, I'm not saying these are the best builds, I'm not saying this is the way to go, but this is something what people are using in Mythic content right now. And you can see here, most of the Mistweaver monks who are doing raiding content are going to be running that Yulon build. They're going to be running that Clouded Focus build. So it's very different when you look at Mistweaver monk in raid situations, when you look at in Mythic Plus, where Feline Stomp build is a lot more popular. Two different gameplays, almost feels like two different classes. Now, in terms of other healers, Restoration Shaman is doing quite well in terms of pure HPS, and I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. I think Resto Shaman can still provide a decent amount of utility. It's not being included in a lot of the race to world first skills, but if you're playing a Resto Shaman in Mythic raiding, or if you're just playing Resto Shaman generally, I think your throughput is actually pretty decent. So if you look at Resto Shaman most popular builds, you're playing that High Tide build, and you can have mana issues. You just have to be conservative in terms of how you're using a chain heal, track your High Tide buff and things like that. But there is a couple of things that you can provide to a raid. You have Spirit Link Totem. You could probably pick something like Ancestral Protection Totem if you really had to during really hardcore progression. There's other talents that you can change around, and Resto Shaman is, in my eyes, not as bad as people make it out to be. In terms of Discipline Priest, you're honestly pumping. I think your throughput is really high in terms of HPS and in terms of DPS, especially when you have the tier set bonus. You have Barrier, which is actually quite decent on a lot of the fights, especially harder fights. In terms of Discipline Priest playstyle, there's a lot of kind of like Wild West type of thing. There's a Shadow Fiend build, there's a Mindbender build. These are some of the most popular builds. Some people are picking Ultimate Penitence, some people are not. Again, Wild West type of thing, but Discipline Priest, honestly, is in a really good position right now, both in raids and Mythic Plus content. And if you're playing a Priest, you have multiple options, because you're not the only... You can play a Holy Priest. You provide PI and things like that. And Holy Priest, on the other hand, is not doing as hot. But I think people are not... They're not focusing on Holy Priest that much right now, because as a priest, you can play Disc, and Disc is absolutely meta. So most people are going to be flocking to that Discipline Priest. I'm assuming there's going to be changes to Holy Priest in the next couple of weeks, or whatever Blizzard is going to be doing some changes, because Holy Priest could use some love both in raids and Mythic Plus. And when we look at the Holy Priest raid build right now, a lot of people are running that Miracle Worker, they're running that Divine Image. We'll have to see if Blizzard is going to try and fix some of the issues in terms of balancing. Now, Preservation Evoker, I think the throughput is good. I think your 2 set bonus or the tier set bonus is decent as well, depending on... We're assuming that people here have some sort of tier set bonus. We don't know yet. There's no way to really fully check this without actually looking at all the logs and things like that, but this will change in a week or two, when we're going to be safely assuming everyone has a 4 set. In terms of Preservation Evoker, again, a different gameplay for Preservation Evoker in raids than it is in Mythic Plus, because in raid situations, you're running that Cycle of Life, you're running that Emerald Blossoms build, and in Mythic Plus content, you're gonna try and pick up that Stasis if you can. So, different builds in Mythic Plus in raid, just like Mistweaver Monk. In terms of other healers, Restoration Druid, don't be fooled here. Restoration Druid needs a lot of help, and I'll talk about this later in the video. I'll talk about the fact why Resto Druid, even though the HPS is okay in Mythic raiding, why it needs attention. But in terms of Restoration Druid raiding build, we can see here a lot of people are running that Tree of Life. Tree of Life is definitely going to be very popular in raiding situations. A lot of people are running Reforestation. So you have, again, people are really upset about the Flourish nerfs. How do you feel about Restoration Druid Flourish? Like, Flourish is a shadow of itself compared to the previous patches, because it was nerfed so much. But this is something that people are running in terms of Restoration Druid in raiding situations. Again, Grove Guardians, the staple or something that Blizzard has been building upon ever since patch 10.17. And in terms of Holy Paladin, I'll talk about Holy Paladin a bit more in terms of what builds are popular, what builds are really stronger, how people are changing. In terms of the first boss, again, we're showcasing the first boss most popular builds. This is, you have to remember, most used talents. There is a lot of cases where Holy Paladins are going to be swapping away from Beacon of Fate to Beacon of Virtue. For example, when looking at some of the most popular talent builds for Holy Paladin, when doing Mythic rating for the first couple of bosses, you can see here, Beacon of Fate, you can see people swapping to Beacon of Virtue on the second boss, you can see Volcaros being Beacon of Virtue being very popular because it lines up so well. There's a lot of burst AoE healing requirements, so there is going to be changes in Holy Paladin talents depending on the boss fights, depending on the damage patterns. Do you have good targets for Beacon of Fate? Do you have a lot of burst AoE healing requirements? Can you afford to use Beacon of Virtue? Again, a lot of changes, a lot of different builds, wild west for Holy Paladin currently. We'll talk about Holy Paladin problems in terms of the gameplay. That's going to be one of the highlights of the video, or one of the things that I emphasize on, because I'm going to be negative, but I'm going to be negative for a certain reason, because I want Blizzard to know that there are issues with certain healers, no matter if they're perceived meta or not. Before that, what is the Race to World First meta composition right now? So we have Liquid composition here, and this is for Smolderon, but they use the same healing comp for pretty much most of the bosses. Of course, we're not sure what the last boss healing comp is going to be like, because they haven't gone to this to it yet. So there's still, it can still change, but the healing composition both for Liquid, Echo, and some of the top guilds in the world is very similar in terms of double Discipline Priest, in terms of Holy Paladin, in terms of Mistweaver Monk. And a lot of people might be asking, why is it this strict composition? Are these the best healers no matter what? A lot of it is to do with the fact you're trying to spread your raid buffs. For example, Holy Paladin might not be the hottest healer out there after all the nerfs that happened to this in terms of mana issues and things like that, but you need to have 2 Paladins in your raid group in order to provide auras. You need to have that Devo aura, you want to have that red aura. And a lot of the time, a lot of the guilds decided to bring the second Paladin in form of Protection Paladin. So in terms of Discipline Priest or Priest in general, you want that PI. Again, Discipline Priest barrier is actually pretty decent in certain fights, but you want that PI. It's very good on certain classes and things like that. And Mistweaver Monk, you need to have a monk in your raid composition because you need that Mystic Touch. And a lot of the guilds are not bringing Brewmaster Monk, they're not bringing Windwalker Monk, and they're bringing Mistweaver. Mistweaver on top of that is also kind of pumping in terms of the throughput, so Mistweaver is not a bad pick overall. And you can see the same composition is being used in most of the top end guilds. They want to spread the raid buffs. You need to have a mage for Arcane Intellect. You need to have that. You need to have a Druid in terms of getting Mark of the Wild. And most of the guilds decided to bring something like a Feral Druid. You could probably bring a Balanced Druid depending how hardcore you are and things like that. But a lot of the guilds are not going to bring a Restoration Druid because Resto Druid is really down in the dumps, and I want to really emphasize this. I want to be very negative about certain healers who are not performing well with the hopes that Blizzard is going to address them. Restoration Druid in top-end Mythic raiding guilds or high-end performance is really bad. And that's the main reason to do with the fact that Restoration Druid, in terms of what does it bring to the raid. If you already have Mark of the Wild, you don't really bring anything to the group that is of value. And on top of that, you're sometimes or a lot of times perceived as a HPS healer, and your HPS is average or even below average, and your mana issues are insane. You have so many mana issues, your HPS is average, you don't have a huge utility unless you don't have a Druid in your group and you need that Mark of the Wild. Resto Druid needs huge changes in raid. They need to have, I'm sure Blizzard is going to acknowledge that. I'm sure Blizzard is looking at the data, they're seeing that, hey, what is the point of bringing Resto Druid in high-end Mythic raiding? There's literally nothing. They need to have a significant HPS boost that does not increase their HPS in Mythic Plus, because in Mythic Plus, Resto Druid is arguably one of the top climbers. So Resto Druid is doing really well in Mythic Plus content, and in raid, in high-end raiding, it's really down in the dumps. It needs big changes, and I hope that Blizzard is going to be able to buff Resto Druid HPS without buffing it or changing it too much in Mythic Plus. In terms of Holy Priest, I think Holy Priest could also use help, but I don't think Blizzard is going to... We'll have to see how Blizzard is going to approach changes and things like that, because I think most of the Priest healers right now are trying out Discipline Priest, and Discipline is arguably one of the most popular, if not the best healers right now, because of the fact you have 2 Discipline Priests in most of the Race to World First compositions. You can do... Look at the damage. This is healer damage right now in Mythic raiding. Discipline Priest, especially when you get that tier set and things like that, you're pumping damage. Look at Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin used to be a second in a lot of the cases in previous tiers. Holy Paladin has fell down quite a bit. So just a summary in terms of raid, honestly guys, if you're not doing the highest content in terms of raiding, in terms of mythic raiding and things like that, you can play whichever healer you want, but I definitely want to be negative about certain healers because I want Blizzard to acknowledge the fact that they need help. Certain healers have very little value when it comes to mythic raiding, when it comes to high-end raiding, and in my opinion that should change. In my opinion, Blizzard should really acknowledge that certain healers don't bring enough utility, so therefore they should bring enough HPS. They've done that in the past where you had certain healers that don't bring damage reduction or something along those lines, that those healers end up doing more HPS, which we've seen in the previous tiers. We're not really seeing that right now. Tier set might change a lot of those things, we'll have to see. In terms of Mythic Plus, I don't want people to look at this information. This is sub-creation healer tier list for this week based on this many runs from plus 17 to 26. So this is more about popularity than the actual spec capabilities. I would, again, there's going to be a disclaimer on this, do not pay attention too much. I want to include this because I would actually place all of these healers in something like A tier. I actually believe the healer balance in Mythic Plus is actually going really well. I think you could play, for example, Mistweaver Monk. You could do really high keys as Mistweaver Monk, you could do really high keys as Preservation, as Resto Druid, as Holy Paladin. Resto Shaman is not as bad as people make it out to be, but I actually genuinely believe you can have a good time with every single healer out there in Mythic Plus content, maybe Holy Priest. Again, there's a couple of underlying healers that could use some tuning because their performance in raids might not translate in Mythic Plus. The best example of this is Restoration Druid, because Resto Druid in Mythic Plus content is pumping. You have to remember the utility that Resto Druid provides in Mythic Plus in terms of Mark of the Wild and Battle Res is a lot harder to find in that 5-man content when it comes to raiding content where you have a lot more players. On top of that, your throughput, your utility, again, Mark of the Wild and Battle Res are the most notable selection here. And on top of that, the DPS that you can provide, because cat weaving was buffed by such a significant amount. I love this change because if you're a Resto Druid who's going to min-max your DPS, for example, you're staying in kitty form, you can cast Grove Guardians in kitty form. You see someone who's 50% HP and you're like, no, I'm not going to heal them because there's no damage happening. I'm going to stay into my kitty form and keep doing damage. The amount of DPS you can do as Resto Druid is actually kind of insane. And it's all basically skill based, whether it's your skill or the group skill in avoiding damage. The more time you can spend DPSing, especially in that cat weaving, you're going to be a blaster. So Resto Druid is doing really well in Mythic Plus content, arguably climbing and climbing and climbing. And Resto Druid in raid content is arguably the worst healer when you compare the whole package. So this is why there's such a big differentiation between certain healers. We had to talk about Holy Paladin a bit. Holy Paladin has fallen a bit. What happened to Holy Paladin? Honestly, it's making me really sad because I consider Holy Paladin gameplay right now in Season 3 to be the least appealing gameplay in the whole expansion. Don't get me wrong, Holy Paladin can still do good numbers. You're still going to be included in Race to World first in terms of raid because you want those Paladin auras. So Holy Paladin is still going to be included. Beacon of Virtue, you can still pump HPS depending on which boss you're doing in raid. Let's be honest, the gameplay of Holy Paladin, you have tons of mana issues. You're going to be hard casting, or you're going to be consuming your Infusion of Light. You're going to be a lot more hard casting. Your holy power in raid content doesn't really matter that much depending on which build you're running, because you might be just using your spenders based on something like Blessing of Dawn procs or Blessing of Dawn buff if you have it. But holy power spender imbalance is not a new issue. I was just kind of hoping that in Season 3 Blizzard would actually look into this problem. And it's not like Holy Paladin is the only healer that has mana issues. There's plenty other healers that struggle with mana. And because Blizzard increased the cost of Holy Shock, the class revolves around Holy Shock, and pressing Holy Shock can sometimes feel bad because it will lead to mana issues. And it just doesn't make sense a lot of the time. I don't want to go on a rant. Holy Paladin is still doing well in terms of being perceived as a good healer and things like that, but there's multiple things that are wrong, in my opinion, in terms of how it plays. I consider the Holy Paladin rework in patch 10.15 to be one of the best gameplays for Holy Paladin. It was insanely fun, you had no mana issues, you barely ever hard casted, you basically just relied on instant abilities. It was great. Now, how can the gameplay shift from arguably one of the best playstyles for Holy Paladin in patch 10.15 to arguably one of the worst playstyles? Hard casting, mana issues, all of those things, I just don't know. Let me know, guys. I really want to know your opinion about this. How do you feel about Holy Paladin right now? I also am going to finish off the video. I'm going to finish off in terms of the summary of everything again. Don't look at this information. Sub-creation information is kind of memey. It's all about popularity, respect. All of these healers could easily be in A tier right now. Play whichever healer you like because you're going to do really well, or at least you're going to have the best time because you enjoy that healer. In terms of raiding, there's definitely healers who are doing more HPS and healers who should be performing better in raid. Guys, let me know how you feel about the mana issues as healers right now, because I don't understand them at all. Certain healers out there have very little mana issues, and other healers have so many mana issues that they have to change their gameplay or talent builds, aka Holy Paladin. How do you feel about the more caster build for Holy Paladin? How do you feel about the mana issues? How do you feel about the Holy Power? How do you compare Holy Paladin from the iteration in terms of the rework in patch 10.15 to now? In my opinion, Holy Paladin gameplay in Season 3, it's the worst it's been this expansion. But again, if you're someone who likes that caster playstyle a bit more, I think there's going to be split opinions here. I talked about performance of healers. I talked about the differentiation in terms of Mythic Plus and raids, because Blizzard is having a really hard time in terms of balancing both, because certain healers can perform really well in Mythic Plus content, but they're not doing all that well in raids. How do you balance that? How do you change those classes? What do you need to do? Let me know which healers are the biggest losers in terms of, hey, I don't like the gameplay, I don't like how it's performing right now. Let me know which healers needs both. Let me know which healers needs changes. Let me know which healers you're enjoying the most, because this is a discussion video. This is a snapshot in terms of how healers are performing right now. This is going to change. Once people are getting more tier sets and things like that, the graphs, the data is going to change. The meta for Mythic Plus hasn't really been found yet because most people are pushing raids. But after that, I think the meta is going to be a little bit more clear. I think the balancing for healers in Mythic Plus is a lot better than it was in Season 2, because Season 2 was just absolutely shambolic. I think Season 3 healer balance is going to be a lot better. I don't think Holy Paladin is going to be the king of Mythic Plus anymore. I think if you're a Mistweaver or Monk, this is your patch. I think Monk is doing really well, both in Mythic Plus and raids, and I think if you're enjoying Mistweaver Monk, I played Monk a lot in terms of Mythic Plus and things like that. I'm having a blast playing as a Monk. I'm having such a fun time, because especially fist weaving, I shouldn't say fist weaving, that Feline Storm build in Mythic Plus content feels so rewarding to play. I also think Discipline Priest is doing really well in all forms of content. Arguably the most meta healer right now, which is not surprising because it received the biggest rework, and I think it created a lot of buzz around the class, and Discipline Priest is doing really well. Let me know how you feel about the new or simplified gameplay. If you're playing Restoration Shaman, you might be surprised about the output versus Shaman right now. I know a lot of people are still calling for some changes and things like that, but let me know how you enjoy your Shaman, because I think it surprised quite a few people. If you're playing Preservation Evoker, I think you're happy with the output that Preservation Evoker can achieve. I still think Preservation Evoker's meta status still kind of relies on how well Augmentation is going to do, especially in something like Mythic Plus content. Or if you're someone who likes Mythic Plus and pushing Mythic Plus and you enjoy healer damage, honestly, Cat Weaving with Resto Druid is insanely rewarding because it has a really high skill ceiling. Or maybe you're looking for a chill healer to just relax and heal the group, and I think Holy Priest can fill in that kind of gap as well. How do you feel about the balance of healers right now, and which healers need to be changed? Let me know, leave your comments below, and if you like this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next guide.